Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have the pleasure of being joined by the incredibly talented We Shouldn't Be Here on our hunt for horrors on this windy night. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This is the most traumatic incident of my life. It still haunts me after 5 years. Although I grew up in the capital of my country, my family owns a house in one of the many islands. My grandmother grew up there, and we inherited the house. This island is extremely beautiful, and we went there for vacations every summer. Let me give you some info about the locals. They are very different from residents of the other islands, mainly due to historical factors. The island was not populated until pirates started dropping off their women and children that they'd kidnapped. They returned often to rape them, and this resulted in the island being populated by people that were the products of rape. On top of that, there's a specific village with a strange aura around it. They say that the residents of the village are full of incest. I believe it to be true, because there are a lot of retarded or odd people living out there. So you understand that the population of the island in general was developed on a quite messed up basis. And I need to make it abundantly clear, this is not my own personal prejudice. This is based on truth. It's a highly popular tourist destination worldwide, and if you're not from there, or you don't spend much time there, you probably wouldn't see it. Anyway, I was around 16 and my sister 14. We were spending our summers there, going to the beach and then going out. We were both too young to understand certain things. Plus, the crime rate in the island is pretty low, and they're generally considered safe. So our parents were fine with us going out until late at night. I should also mention now that this was 2011. So we had cell phones but not smartphones. We also didn't have any credit to make phone calls. That was unusual for teenagers at the time, because it was expensive and we didn't have a lot of pocket money. So we were often without credit. One night, we were hanging around the port where we lived when we met a group of local people. They were all around 20 years old and very friendly. So we were happy that they hung out with us. There were 5, 3 guys and 2 girls that were sisters. Their names were Manos, Takis, Stravos, Tina and Elsa. The girls looked like blonde models, while the guys were the typical local youths with scooters. We were drinking when they suggested that we go to their village, the one I mentioned before, to hang around in one of the girls' houses. The girls had a car, so they drove us there, and the boys followed with their scooters. When we entered the house, my sister and I both realized that there was something wrong. It was dirty. There was a bad smell coming from the backyard. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to appear rude, and also, we didn't have a car. The house was small, and the girls showed us around. When we reached the bedroom of their parents, there were bloodstains on the bed. Tina quickly changed the sheets, explaining that their dad got into a fight recently and was bleeding everywhere. She spoke about it as if it were normal, and I could feel my younger sister getting afraid right next to me. The guys sat in the living room smoking a joint. They offered, but we politely refused. Both of us felt like we needed to be sober, so we should figure out a way to get away from this place. Everyone pushed us to smoke, to the point that we couldn't say no. So I took a puff, but I didn't breathe the smoke down. But my sister didn't know how to do this trick, and she got high quite quickly. At this point I was scared. I had to get us out of there. Takis came to sit next to me, talking to me in a flirty way. Stravos did the same thing to my sister. She was too high to resist. I watched, panicked, whilst they were kissing, and he was touching her private parts. I was pushing Takis away, saying that I had a boyfriend, but he didn't care. I was terrified. These guys were a lot older than us. Remember, the one with my sister was at least 6 years older, and what he was doing was technically paedophilia. My mind is working like crazy, and I stand up and go to the bathroom. The smell of the bathroom was awful. There was a second door to the backyard, and I carefully opened the door. The smell became unbearable. I felt like vomiting. There were piles of trash, and I got closer. And there, near the trash, there was a dead cat. To make things worse, the body was surrounded by her kittens, all dead. I vomited on the trash, but I decided to have a closer look. The cat didn't die a natural death. She was stabbed in the belly with a knife. I quickly realized the kittens died unborn, and it didn't take me long to put two and two together and figure out that's where the blood on the upstairs sheets came from. I find people who can kill animals so heartlessly to generally have something wrong with them. These people, in my mind, were now even worse than they were just a few minutes ago. I freaked out. I was incredibly scared. My mind was telling me to run. There was indeed an exit from the backyard, and that would take me to the main street, but I had to find a way to get my sister to escape as well. Shit. All this time my sister was being molested in the living room next door, alone and high, and completely ignorant to what exactly was going on. I rushed back in, trying to look normal. When I entered the living room, everyone was close to my sister. I mean, everyone. They were all touching her. Their hands were inside her pants, whilst the guys were starting to take their clothes off. She was sobering up at this point, and she was freaking out, saying things like, "No, I don't want to." And Manos told her to shut up, and that she was going to like it. I stood there, and Takis stood up suddenly to bring me into their twisted game. Then something happened that I will be very grateful for. My sister said that she needed to vomit, and it was true. She was pale, and she could barely hold it back. Nobody wanted to be vomited on, so they instantly let her go. She rushed to the bathroom, and I went in after her. She vomited, and then without saying anything, I grabbed her arm and dragged her out. She was in a very bad mood, almost fainting, and we rushed to the exit of the backyard, and then to the main street. We had no credit on our phones, so I stopped a woman and asked to make a phone call to call my parents to pick us up, as they were very concerned. I had to explain to them exactly what happened, and they were terrified. The next years, naturally, we were not allowed to do a whole lot, until they finally calmed down. I was stupid to follow some strangers, but we were naive teenagers. When I think of the dangers we put ourselves in, I still shiver. My parents thought about calling the police, but it wasn't very safe, as we found out that the girl's father was dealing drugs. My country has a very high level of corruption, and the police are rarely dependable. So we just rented out the house and never came back for vacation. Since then, me and my sister are way more suspicious and careful. I'm happy we escaped, and I wish we'd never met them. So, Crazy Island locals, I really hope you get what's coming to you. I never wish to meet you again.
This story is about a girl who was more than just a bad roommate. She is deranged, and her behavior terrified me. I moved abroad for work some years ago. I've had a variety of housemates during this time. Some were great, some were okay, and a few bad apples. My most recent flatmate, however, was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Penny. She had posted an ad looking for female working flatmates and lived in a luxury apartment. I live in a developing country in Asia, in its capital city, which is notorious for its difficult housing market, among many other things. It is not advisable for girls to live alone as a safety precaution. Also factor in that I am alone in this country and rely heavily on a secure and comfortable living situation. I responded to Penny's advert looking for flatmates and arranged to see the place. It was a nice apartment with a reasonable rental price. Penny seemed nice enough. She said she was a lawyer and was looking for non-intrusive and responsible people to live with. I was looking for the same and thought it was a great place. I took the room and moved in the following month. Penny had some issues with the other flatmate, which culminated in Penny locking the girl outside and police being called. The departed flatmate told me that Penny would randomly text her abuse in the middle of the night with the strangest insults. Things like, "You have crap taste and you are so old, honey. My dog has more talent than you." Alarm bells were ringing, but I believed Penny when she told me that the girl had not paid rent and was threatening to ransack the place. Plus, I had nowhere to go as I had secured this room already. I am living alone with Penny and a 20-year-old girl who had been employed by Penny's family to live with their daughter as a maid. The first week was fine. I realized, however, that Penny wasn't a lawyer and that she was actually unemployed. She would lie about going to work, how her day was, and what she ate during lunch break at this non-existent job. I knew she was lying because the maid told me that Penny was strange and never left the apartment. I let it go, figured that she may be embarrassed of being unemployed. Penny had no idea I could communicate with the maid, as she was unaware I could speak the local language. When I found out that the maid was completely illiterate, I told Penny I'd be teaching her how to read. Penny told me that there was no point, because the maid wouldn't be interested, as poor people supposedly have no respect for education, and to not teach her anything, because being literate wouldn't improve her life anyway. Actually, the maid was interested in learning to read, and I started to teach her. The maid wanted this to be kept secret, and hid her notebook and pen during the day inside a box. I strongly believe Penny wanted to keep her illiterate, as she wanted her to be as vulnerable as possible. The maid had left school at 7 years old, and had been working full-time since the age of 12, which Penny thought was great, and she had learned to cook very well. In the third week, craziness started. Penny presented me with a food bill, saying she'd ordered $300 worth of food for us. This was untrue. A weekly shop here is around $15. She would also hang around outside my room, wanting to talk before I left for work in the mornings, and then do the same thing in the evenings. I thought she was a lonely girl, and I felt sorry for her. She'd literally follow me to my bedroom door and keep talking until it was shut in her face. She would talk to me for around 40 minutes at a time, uninterrupted, as if she was talking to herself. I could rarely get a word in. She appeared very unaware of social etiquette and thought it was normal to have a conversation where she was the only one speaking to the point of breathlessness. She had texted me while I was at work, saying things like, "We need to talk this evening about apartment stuff," smiley face. One day, we had a drink and she told me many things, that she was extremely academically gifted. She had traveled the world, was related to the royal family, had a wardrobe worth thousands of dollars, and also that her boyfriend had died the year before. I found out her boyfriend was actually alive, but figured this was her way of dealing with a bad breakup. The rest of her story were lies. 90% of what she said was untrue. She would lie about trivial things, which convinced me that she had a personality disorder. I'd come back from work and she'd tell me that she'd arrived 1 hour before me and was having a nap, even though she'd spent the whole day asleep after taking various substances. Penny's mother often rang the maid to find out what Penny was doing, and she would send Penny's cousin around every few weeks to check on her. During this time, Penny would also lie to them that she had a good job and that I was her close friend. Thinking of this freaks me out, because I would generally avoid her if I could at this point. However, her family seemed to know a lot about me in the space of a few weeks. She clearly concocted a story about me to her family. I guess as the weeks went by, she became comfortable and started being more of herself. She would sleep all day and be awake during the night. She would drink up to 3 bottles of whiskey per week, mixing with various medications that she was taking. The maid told me all of this as she was cleaning Penny's room. Penny also claimed to not know how old she was. Penny treated the maid very badly. The maid was not allowed to speak to anyone or go out in public or eat properly. She was expected to eat small portions and leftovers. I would take her out often for a snack or ice cream, which is when she had told me about Strange Penny. I was told that the maid was earning $150 per month. Penny included my share of this in my rent, so I was contributing $75 to her salary. I later found out that her wage was only $85, so Penny was knowingly giving this maid $10 per month to work for her full time, for 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. working hours. She once berated her terribly for going to sleep at 1 a.m. and woke her up, demanding she would cook for her. Penny reasoned that poor people needed to be kept in check and that they weren't normal people. Penny had a pet dog, and she seemed obsessed with and would spend hundreds of dollars weekly on him. She was paying $10 for her maid and $400 for her dog. In my 5 weeks there, that dog rarely left her bedroom. He would poop all over her bed and pee on her mattress. When she was questioned about the piss stain, she said it was water. It definitely was not water. I thought she was engaging in bestiality, and the maid confided that she too thought Penny was indeed engaging in some sexual relations with her dog. Her dog also randomly pissed in the common areas, and on one occasion, Penny came out of her room and stood in the piss with her bare feet. She seemed totally unbothered by it. She also claimed her dog could speak to her. Penny would also eat my food and then deny it, offering the explanation that it could be a ghost. Conversely, she'd claim that she was often starving because she had no access to food, even though she binged daily. I questioned her about my missing food, and she would scream that she had no idea where it went, and that I shouldn't use the fridge. The fact that she believed in her own delusions seriously freaked me out. She claimed that her friends used to live with her, even though I found no evidence of her ever living with others in that place. She hated for other girls to be described as attractive, as she was severely overweight and never showered. Her hair was knotted throughout, as she hadn't washed it for months. She would also have the maid massage her often. On the occasions that she would leave her door open, I would see her sitting in bed, gawking at TV, and eating or drinking. She also seemed out of breath very often. I don't know why, because she never did anything active. During my time in that apartment, Penny never left the apartment building once. She just had her routine of sleeping, eating, drinking, and taking pills. She'd often pretend she was going somewhere. On a few occasions, she would turn the lights off and the TV off in her bedroom and stay silent for hours to make me believe she was not there. She even made up an elaborate lie that she was taking some exams and pretended to be stressed on the day, even though she never actually had any exams. She seemed to include details in her lies to make them more realistic. It scared me that she did this so naturally. She displayed bouts of mania where she'd spend hundreds of dollars on decorations, like plastic flowers and small figurines, and she'd be up at 5 a.m. decorating the common areas. She did this routine several times. I would often hear her during the night, pacing back and forth down the hallway in the apartment. She claimed she was decorating the place for all of her friends to enjoy, even though no one would come to see her aside from the cousin. In week 5 of me living there, I heard screaming and shouting one evening. I thought Penny was on the phone, so I ignored it. I then received a hysterical phone call from the maid saying Penny accused her of stealing something and was going to beat her up, so she ran to her room. I asked Penny what happened, and she said that the maid had a bad attitude and started crying for no reason. She said she'd just come down with some difficult exams and had been stressed and wanted to chill, not deal with a rude maid. That night, Penny also severely verbally abused the maid for refusing to come up and take more abuse. I heard Penny making a phone call to the maid, in which she screamed the following: "Useless, rude bitch. What are you doing relaxing in your room? I want my drink. Bring it to me now. Useless bitch. I'm ill and I want my drink. I'm too ill to get it myself." But Penny was not ill, and the drink in question had been left on the kitchen counter. Penny wanted the maid to deliver it to her head. I saw the maid later that night to give her some dinner. Her eyes were red from crying and she was shaking. That same night, the maid told me she wanted to leave the next day, although she had no idea how to leave, as she was illiterate and relied on Penny's family for travel arrangement. The maid told me she had called Penny's parents and told them what happened, and they told her not to leave. She then said to me, "Her parents don't care about me. Why should I stay to die? I don't want to die here." She asked that I not leave her alone with Penny until she left. That night I feared for my own safety. I was awoken during the day by Penny slamming doors and running around. She was high and intoxicated and had likely gone to the maid's room in an attempt to hurt her, although she could not gain entry. The next day came, and the maid had packed her 3 bags. Penny's mother rang the maid and instructed her to go and cook lunch for Penny. Penny burst out of her room as soon as she heard her in the kitchen, and all hell broke loose. Penny was screaming and told the maid she was nothing but an uneducated village girl who was not a princess and who should never dare to defy her, that she shouldn't even make certain facial expressions in her presence. She said the maid was behaving as if she was an educated and upper-class girl, when actually she was worth nothing. Penny held the power, and she was going to call the police to come and arrest the maid. She carried on abusing her while I tried to intervene. Of course, Penny wanted the maid to keep working and have her scrub the floors right up until she needed to leave. Penny said to me, "Can you believe this girl is trying to leave, leaving me without a maid?" I was both scared and speechless. I don't think I'll ever forget this scene. Before the maid left, Penny insisted on checking the maid's belongings for supposedly stolen items. We went outside the apartment where Penny emptied the maid's 3 bags, including her underwear, removing various items she claimed were hers. She called the maid a whore and accused her of screwing around, which is very taboo here. Penny even attempted to take away a gift that I had given the maid. I gave her the gift as she told me she had never had a birthday gift in her life. I can only describe it as the denigration of one human by another. Penny's parents kept calling throughout the day, begging the maid to continue living with their daughter. They did this as they heard their daughter's level of disturbing abuse. To execute their plan, they told her they couldn't book her a ticket home and she would have to stay. Luckily, and with my help, the maid and I arranged for her fiancé to collect her. I have no doubt she would have severely beaten the maid had I not been present. That day I decided to move out and left 2 days later, stressed and disturbed from what I had witnessed. I hadn't seen Penny since the maid left, and she locked herself in her room. The night before I was leaving, I went to tell her I'd be moving out. I knocked on her door every hour for the whole evening. Knowing she was inside. She pretended to be out again and turned off her lights, although I heard her dog barking. The next morning, I saw her, and she said that her friends had taken her out to cheer her up after what the maid did to her. She said that she knew I'd been knocking on her door because her dog had panicked and knocked over his water bowl, causing Penny to slip and injure herself when she returned. She had concocted this version of events to tell me. 2 days after leaving, I received a phone call from Penny's mother, who was worried she couldn't contact her daughter. Penny would do this often, as if she wanted her family to think she was dead. I found out that her mother immediately flew into the city, checked whether her daughter was alive or not, then left. In this country, some view mental illness as taboo, so while Penny's family are aware of their daughter's fragile mental state, they did nothing. I assume they enabled her because they do not want to deal with her. They allowed her to abuse a vulnerable girl from a poor family in the process, knowing the maid would have no option but to endure abuse. I assume another vulnerable girl has now been sent to live with Penny and is probably trapped as the other young girl had been. Penny also continues to advertise her apartment, looking for people to live with. I hope I never see her again, and hope that her future roommates see beyond her act of normalcy that she puts on when you first meet her. This happened around a year ago. I was living in a large city in the UK, around a mile from the center. Although the area I lived in was nice, the city itself had a lot of crime. A teenage girl actually got stabbed to death on her way to school on a bus near my flat not long ago. I had just finished my university class and was waiting at the bus stop. And I'm helping a woman locate her bus on the timetable. And as I'm helping her, my bus pulls up and drives away. Great. A man must have seen the whole thing happen because he comes over to me and says something along the lines of, "Tough luck, that's annoying." And I reply, "Yeah, typical." Just normal small talk, trying to be polite to him. Shortly after, the next bus comes along. I get on, and so does the man I was just talking to, which I found weird as he could have gotten the earlier bus that I missed. But whatever, I don't really think much of it, and I put my headphones in and continue on the 20-minute journey home. I get off of the bus at my normal stop, and I'm walking along when suddenly I feel somebody grab my shoulder. I flinch and instinctively push the hand away and look behind me. It's the man from before. I took my headphones out, and he says, "Hey beautiful, you got a man?" My defenses immediately go up, as I'm sure any girl living in a city will understand. I start walking, and he follows me. I say, yeah, sorry." I'm pretty bewildered at this point. I have experienced creepers before, but not somebody actually physically grabbing me. "Nah, you're just saying that. I can tell you're lying. Come on, beautiful, can I have your number?" "No, I have a boyfriend." I actually wasn't lying. I did have a boyfriend. He continues asking over and over again, getting angrier and angrier at me. "No, sorry." At this point I start walking really fast, almost jogging. He's still following me. It's about a 5-minute walk to my flat, and he followed me the whole way back. I honestly think at this point that I'm about to be attacked or stabbed. I've never been in this situation before, probably due to the fact that I'm 5'11". Even though I only weigh 130 pounds, I've been told I look intimidating due to my height. So I get to my flat, and he's followed me all the way to the doors. Luckily, I get in and shut the doors before he follows and goes up to my flat. Around 30 minutes later, I go out to my balcony, and I look down, and he's still there. I contemplated calling the police, but instead, I called the front desk, and they went out. I could hear them threatening to call the police if he didn't leave. Thankfully, he does. I spend the rest of my months living there, worried that he was going to show up, but luckily he didn't. My stomach turned recently when I heard on the news that not 5 minutes from where I used to live and where all of this took place, a girl was walking home late at night and she got raped. She flagged a car down for help and got raped again by a different guy. I can't imagine the horror that this poor girl went through. So be wary with who you speak.
I need to give you a little background about myself before I start the story, so you guys have an idea of who I was, better yet, of how mentally I was back then. I'm a short white guy, flat out, as tall as 5'2", and weighed as much as around 115 to 125 pounds. I was rebellious mainly, and didn't care about anything, only my music and friends. I was an emo skater gutter punk, around the ages of 15 to 16. I guess you could say at the time, I didn't scare very easily. Plain and short, I just wanted to play music and get shit-faced. Honestly, I got into fights and trouble illegally, but I digress. I grew up in the inner city part of LA. I wish I could say it was a nice part, but my family wasn't too smart financially, so we went from house to house around LA, ending up in Whittier, a smaller town in the hills, going towards Huntington Beach, where half of my family resides to this day. It was around the end of my sophomore year in high school, and I was invited to a party with a few friends. They wanted to all walk together, so I could buy them alcohol, since I had my ways around the law. I was having a great time, even when we got to the party. I drank a ton, smoked some weed for free, and even bumped into my friends, Jeebus and Crunch from my hometown. Eventually, the owner of the house told everyone that they had to stop, so Jeebus and Crunch and I were like, screw it, let's go smoke outside the party. First mistake of the night. I repeat, never leave the party to hang out outside. Anyway, we started talking, smoking, and drinking outside on the side of the house. Everything was cool and chill. I don't know exactly when, but probably after we smoked like 2 bowls, about 4 people were coming out of the party. 2 guys and 2 girls to be exact. The best way I can describe them is ghetto chulos and cholas. If you don't know what those are, I suggest you watch the movies Dirty, Training Day, and Blood In, Blood Out to get an idea. I didn't care about them, and I told Jeebus to hold my beer as I packed another bowl. They were passing us by, and one of the guys started talking to Jeebus about his hair. He had 3 different colours in his hair, with it spiked up, so it wasn't abnormal for people to talk to him about it. When out of nowhere, this guy's girlfriend says, "I want a beer, baby." The guy turns to Jeebus and asks him, "Hey, you think my girl can have a drink of your beer?" Jeebus, the nice guy he was, said, "Yeah," and started handing the cholo guy his halfway done beer when the girl's guy goes, "No, I want a drink of that one," all the while pointing to my brand of beer. When I hear this, I literally stop packing the pipe and turn to Jeebus, grabbing my beer, saying with a sass, "Nah, this is my beer, you can't have this one." And with this, my second mistake was made, ladies and gentlemen. They all stared at me with a look of utter disgust. The other guy starts getting closer and starts asking me, "Do you know where you are? Do you know who you're messing with? Do you want to say that again?" Either I had beer balls, or I just didn't care about shit, and responded with, There's a liquor store right down the street. Your girl is thirsty. Go get her one. This is my beer, and I bought it with my money." The two guys didn't like the response at all. They started saying they were going to shoot us. I'm the kind of guy who doesn't believe it until he sees it. I laughed at them and said, "I don't see guns anywhere." And that was my final and fatal mistake of the night. Right as I finished my sentence, one of the guys walks into an open car, opens the door, looks underneath the seat, and walks back with his hand inside of his pants. I honestly couldn't tell if he was messing with us or serious. I did the only thing my brain could do, and that was talk. I asked them if they were seriously going to shoot me, a kid from no gang or tagging crew, just because a girl wanted my beer. I told them, "You guys don't know me or my family. You can shoot me down, but I swear on everything that I am someone, and people will be out for your blood." As I stared into their eyes intensely, the guy let go of his pants and told everyone to get in the car. When I turned to the likes of Jeebus and Crunch, their mouths were open in shock. The Cholos and Cholas went into the car and made a U-turn, stopping right in front of us. They rolled down their window, yelling at us, cursing at us and saying their gang name. The driver pulls out a handgun from the car and points it right at us. Jeebus and Crunch ducked behind the cars as my stupid ass stood there, looking at them in the same way I did when telling them that there would be blood if anything were to happen to me. The driver pulled the gun away, yelled a final curse directed at me, and burned rubber out on the street. I'm not gonna lie, my heart was pounding at my throat when my eyes met with the glare of that gun. But I had to shake it off and then started laughing to myself. Jeebus and Crunch started laughing half-heartedly, and finally spoke, since I told the Cholo-looking guys no beer for him or his girlfriend. They began to tell me they were waiting for me to throw the first punch so that we could beat them up, right then and there. I really doubt they would have done anything though. That moment has certainly stuck with me. But seriously, who does that over just a beer?
Today is the first day of my summer vacation. It has definitely been an interesting way to start it off. You see, my family has always been haunted. Spirits and demons, of different kinds, have always followed me and my family around. In the house I currently live in, and have been living in for years, my parents and I are accompanied by a white and transparent little girl, a tall dark shadow figure of a man, and a woman who has only been seen twice, but actually has colors filling out her clothes and body. It's considered normal to hear footsteps in the hallway, to see a shadow lurking in the corners, to feel the presence of an unknown entity, and to feel someone or something watching me as I go about my daily business. Like I said, today is the first day of my summer vacation. I woke up this morning and checked the time. It was a little past 9. It's not early, I'm aware of that. But considering the fact that I go to bed late, and I wake up several times at night, and wake up every day at 6 to get ready for school, I was determined to spend the first day of break catching up on sleep. As I turned into a comfortable position, I heard my mother walking through the hallway. I thought, she's still home? She's probably waiting for me to get up so she can drag me off to work with her. I cuddled deeper into my blanket as I heard my mother walking towards my door, which I close every night while I sleep. I kept as still as possible. She opens my door and is just standing there for a while, deciding whether I was actually asleep or not. She does this sometimes, but was taking longer than usual. I dug my nails into the palm of my hand to keep my face serious. I wanted to open my eyes, smile, and tell her that I'm actually awake, but decided not to because sometimes, if I stay asleep long enough, she'll leave me at home and go to work without taking me. Finally, she slowly started to close my door, being careful not to wake me, and I heard her walk away. I actually was sleepy, so even after she closed the door, I didn't move. I was drifting into dreamland. However, the lower half of my body was not covered with my blanket, and I noticed it was getting cold. I opened my eyes and covered myself, then turned towards my door. I thought to myself, she didn't completely close it. She usually does. I shifted my position once again and was now facing away from the door, towards my wall. I could hear my mom walking around the house. She was cleaning. She was going from one room to another, going back and forth, passing through the hallway. I could tell, even though I couldn't hear her footsteps, because despite the fact that we have a carpet, the floorboards under always tend to creak, just like my door does whenever it's moved. I heard her coming towards my room again. She paused at the door, then very carefully pushed it open. She stood there for a while, then she very carefully closed it again. That's weird. Usually she only checks once. I took the blanket off. I was starting to sweat. I could hear her moving around the house. I had just gotten comfortable when I heard her outside my room again. She opened the door as quietly as she could. She checked on me, closed it slightly, and then walked away. I was starting to get really uncomfortable. I had a strange feeling, and I didn't know why. It's as if my brain knew something, but wasn't bringing it to my attention. I listened to the sounds around me. My mother was in the kitchen. The dogs were still barking, but were starting to quiet down. Wait, why were the dogs barking? Something isn't right. I turned back to face the side of my room, where the door was. I looked in the hall. Nothing. I tried to go back to sleep, but something wasn't quite right. My mind started wandering. What if it wasn't my mother that was walking through the house? What if it was a ghost? That's when I felt it. The dreadful sensation that creeps over you when you're being watched. I opened my eyes and that's when I saw him. Down the hall, to the left, some man was standing in the kitchen's doorway. I stared at him as the wheels in my brain started to turn. Someone is standing in my house and was staring right back at me. Who is he? He's not my father. Maybe it's my brother. No. Who is that? I continued to stare at him. I watched him, standing perfectly still, as half of his body peeked out from the kitchen doorway. He was watching me watch him. I started to analyze the parts of him that I could see. He was tall with dark, short hair, most likely black, slim, and his eyes, oh God, his big, dark eyes were staring right into my soul. Although he looked vaguely familiar, I realized I still didn't know who he was. I knew something was wrong, but my mind was refusing to put two and two together. Finally, I realized I was in danger. Someone was intruding my home. Where are my parents? Is this person going to hurt me? I looked away. Although my mind was still groggy, it was working enough for me to realize that at any moment, this man could decide that I'm a threat and attack me. He could threaten me, hurt me, kidnap me, torture me, rape me, kill me. I closed my eyes, pretending I fell back asleep. It was my best option. Maybe I was asleep. Maybe things would be back to normal when I opened my eyes again. I listened intently. I heard the sound of him moving back into the kitchen. No, this was definitely real. I opened my eyes again. He was no longer at the kitchen doorway. Being careful not to make a sound, I walked down the hall and peered into the kitchen. No one was there. I quickly went to the window and looked outside. There was not a soul in sight. The street was empty of the people who are usually working on construction, or the neighbors who watch their kids as they play outside. I looked into our driveway. Vacant. I ran to my mom's room and picked up my phone. I called my mom and begged her to send somebody to pick me up, and then I realized that even though I checked the kitchen, he could still be hiding in the laundry room that's right next to it. I peeked in there and saw that they had opened the door that's in there and gone outside. I closed the door, locked it, and promptly went into my room and locked myself in there. I put on some comfortable clothing and some shoes that I could easily run in. When my dad finally got home, I followed him as he checked every room in the house. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then we walked into my mom's old room. It was all messed up. Drawers were open. Things were in the wrong place. Stuff was on the floor. Her jewelry display was knocked over, with most of the jewelry missing. It wasn't until I took all of this in that the gravity of the situation hit me. We had been robbed. According to the neighbor across the street, he was watching TV in his living room when he noticed a young man casually ride up our driveway on his bike. He was thin-built, had short dark hair, and was wearing a dark t-shirt. According to him, the guy got off of his bike, leaned it against the side of the house, and walked back towards the street. He looked around, saw the neighbor watching him, then walked back to the side of the house as if it was no big deal. Thinking a friend of mine was visiting, he was no longer suspicious and went back to watching TV. After gathering all the information we had, we put the story together. My mother left at 9, and when I called my mom for help, it was exactly 9:33. He knew my mom left and would not be returning for a while. He also assumed I would be at school, which is why he entered my room while not being careful of the noise, but then started moving very slowly and quietly when he saw me sleeping at my bed. He hadn't expected me to be home, which is why he kept checking on me so often. He wasn't able to decide on what to do with me. To be honest, what bothers me most is not simply the fact that he was so confident and casual as he was intruding, but that he didn't harm me. Naturally, a thief doesn't want to be recognized, because they don't want any trouble. I am thankful that I was spared, but here's the problem. Put yourself into his shoes. If you were a thief and you broke into somebody's house and found a young girl sleeping in her bed, what would you do? Leave in fear that she'll wake up and call the police? Kill her? Rape her? She is asleep after all. However, that's not what he did. He knows I saw him. I'm a loose end, a witness, a mistake. I would easily be able to give his description to the police, or worse. Maybe I was more alert than he thought and would be able to identify him. But he didn't come after me. He didn't threaten me or harm me in any way. Instead, he stood there as I looked at him. He reacted to my consciousness as if it was nothing, like if he knew I wouldn't be a real threat to him, even if I wanted to be. He waited until I closed my eyes, and then he slipped out of the house as if nothing had happened. What scares me the most is that he's able to get into the house and move around it so smoothly. He knows who lives here, he knows our routine, and he knows the layout of the house. If he didn't know before, he knows now. So what's next? Will he decide it's too dangerous to come back? Or will he regret not dealing with me? Will he come back with others to back him up? Or will he strike again after being more careful about making sure no one is home? Only time will tell. Maybe he knows us better than we think. Maybe he's somebody that knows exactly how we live. Maybe that's why he was so casual about the entire thing, because he knows how my mind works. All I know is that I have a new respect for those Lifetime movies now. I usually criticize the characters for not knowing what's so obviously going on, but I now understand that for some reason, things aren't as clear if you're experiencing them firsthand. So there it is, the first day of my summer vacation. I live in Florida, and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma, so not that long ago. Back in July, the ex and I had finalized the divorce, and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same rental company. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All 15 houses are bordered around a man-made lake with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a fenced backyard. When you walk out of your backyard, you see the lake in front of you and your neighbor's backyard on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party or barbecue, or having people over to watch sports. I was and am still depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbor, Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. My daughter, Alice, is 4 years old, and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoil that girl to death. She truly is my everything, and I count down the days to the weekend, every week, just to be with her. That's why I was upset when Irma came, and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. The weekend before the storm, she was with her mom. Then obviously the weekend of the storm, she was with her mom. Then on top of that, the weekend after, she had to be with her mom because of the power that was still out. No air conditioning in Florida is miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole week because she has the only door with a window facing the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the window screen, so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible when I slept. Eventually the power comes back, and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. That was when the nightmares started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends or one of the teachers at her school. Maybe there was a teacher at her school that sang to the kids that she didn't like. That Saturday night, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could do was point to an empty corner in her room and say, "Look, look." But there was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost. After I calmed her down, she started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy, make her go away." Obviously, she's having nightmares, right? I showed her that there was nothing in the closet, and nothing under the bed, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and quickly fell back to sleep too. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice comes running into my room, screaming, "She's back! She's back!" Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast, and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mom and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her if and when she started having these nightmares again, so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked to give her assurance that I could hear her and that she was safe. That night she slept soundly and didn't make a peep at all. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again because she caught a stomach virus from one of her friends at school. It was Saturday night, and I was sound asleep in my bed. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it, a woman's voice humming a soft nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming, the soft singing, got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I wasn't dreaming. I could hear a woman softly singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I had never been so scared and dumbfounded in my life. I was feeling a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then the voice spoke out. "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I picked up my cell and called Steve from next door. He didn't waste a second. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storm over. I ran outside and found him aiming his shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window. The window that I left open after Irma and never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance woman. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed it was her. Jean played dumb. She said she was not singing and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought that she saw one approaching our house from the lake. Yeah, right. That lady was singing, and she called out to my daughter by name. Yes, it's true that there have been a few gators spotted around the neighborhood. And yes, part of Jean's job was to patrol the lake at night every now and then. But at 2 a.m., I obviously knew it was bullshit. And even though neither Steve or his wife called her out on it, I could tell from the looks on their faces that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me Jean and her husband have been known to be a little cuckoo. But this by far is the craziest thing to happen. Steve helped me install metal bars on Alice's window that afternoon. First, let me explain as to why I was traveling alone in this story. One of my best friends, Kayla, and I work seasonally at a hiking lodge for the summer. We are both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto for the winter. We decided this year, as I bought a car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully, so wonderfully in fact, that we ended up staying longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip short. Now my friend Kayla started her schooling November 1st, so I dropped her off at home in New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed the night at her place, planning to head back to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I could not come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia. So knowing I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hostel for the next day, November 1st, at the Acolyte Hostel on Cabot Trail. When I booked, only one option came up, I assumed because I waited until the last minute to book. A private dorm with a queen-sized bed for $35. I thought, what a bargain, and booked immediately. I left Kayla's house in Moncton at 7 a.m., knowing it was a long drive. The Cabot Trail is roughly 150 kilometers long, so I thought to be safe, I'd plug the hostel address into my Google Maps and head straight there to get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel at roughly noon. Knowing it was too early to check in, I figured I'd consult with the front desk and figure out the nearby hiking trails and bring my bags in later. I was about to arrive at my hostel, according to Google, but all around me was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me that my destination was on my left, but I saw nothing. About 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar, bent to look like the letter A, spray painted bright red. I was staying at the Acolyte Hostel, so I guessed that must be the place, and I followed the dirt road. It led me to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn. No signage. There were 2 cars parked in front, so I parked alongside and got out of my car to try and figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man, around mid-40s, with dark hair and intense eyes, popped out of the barn and asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes. He asked why I booked so last minute, and I explained to him my situation. Seemingly satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on the grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed was that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around its foundation, about 5 feet deep and 3 feet around. He led me across some particle board that was laid down as a sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about the property is that there were no windows. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin, the owner. He proceeded to tell me his grand plans for the space. It all seemed pretty far-fetched, as it was just an old barn with particle boards separating most of the rooms. He led me up the skeleton stairs made of plywood and 2x4s to the cabin loft, where I would be sleeping that night along with his family, the mother of his 5-year-old son, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted that I called her mom. The upstairs was certainly open concept. A frail curtain separated the beds to the sides, with a large open area in the middle. I asked if I was his only occupant that night. He said yes. I had a feeling he didn't often get occupants. I told him I was interested in the hikes in the area and wanted to go to them before it got dark. He gave me very detailed instructions of his favorite hikes and how to get to them, and off I went. I figured the place wasn't ideal, and I wish the website would have let me know it was still being built. But hey, I booked last minute, and beggars can't be choosers. Plus, he was very friendly and helpful on my hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, but I figured I'd be heading into town for dinner. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season, it was a ghost town. All the hostels and B&Bs in the area were boarded up. Such a ghost town, even the liquor store was closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark, dingy, empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase lightly, a disappointing supper. I had this romantic image in my head of me sitting there, on the harbor front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back some ocean-fresh oysters. I was assured by the server that the fried oysters I had ordered were definitely not fresh. I figured with all of my options for things to do and see being exhausted, I should just head back up to the hostel and read my book. I got back around 8 p.m. I could smell that the family that lived there was in the midst of cooking dinner. A little boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys always do, "My name's JP. What's yours?" I say, "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He immediately asked if I wanted to come play. I said, "Definitely. Just let me put my bags down in my room first." He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room, so instead of getting settled in, I just headed straight out into the main area. I started throwing a foam ball around with JP. His mother, father, Kevin, and grandmother, Mom, were all just sitting down to eat without even acknowledging we were there, playing right in front of them. The mother and father just start what seems to be a basic argument, which then turns into them yelling at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP I need to go to my room and call my mommy, as she is wondering where I am. Of course, the boy who doesn't understand proper boundaries, yet follows me through my curtains, and sits on my bed. I tried taking his attention away from his family fighting, so I start asking him where he goes to school, what his favorite color is. His mother starts calling for him. He doesn't answer. Instead, chooses to sit on my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yell to the mother that he's in my room. She runs in and snatches him off my lap and yells to the father, "I know what you're like when you get this angry. I'm taking JP. Don't follow us." I hear her book it down the stairs, and him run after her. I hear a car start up in the lot, and not just drive, but peel away out of the driveway. I hear him cursing. A door slams, and then the sound of the excavator I had seen outside earlier that day came on. I guess he wanted to do some handiwork to let off some steam. Now just left upstairs is me and Grandma, who still insisted that I called her Mom. I walk out of my not-so-private curtained room with my bag and I say, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts, but I should go." She starts rubbing my arm and telling me to stay, explaining her daughter-in-law doesn't understand Kevin like she does, and she's the real problem. Now I'm ready to tell the mom to screw off and just leave, until I realize she still has a knife in her hand from cooking dinner. It's only a 4-inch paring knife, but with intent, I'm sure it would do some damage. I don't think she meant it as a threat. I think maybe she was just a kooky old bird who didn't understand. Maybe don't hold a knife while trying to console a stranger. So I go along with what she is saying, while she rubs my arm with one hand and flails the knife around with the other. I inch closer and closer downstairs and towards the door. She keeps rubbing my arm and my shoulders with her free hand, telling me to stay, and that her grandson is special, and before I even booked the night, he had a premonition that I would be staying with them. As soon as I get out to the door, I run towards my car. I start my engine and back up in the lot to get out of there. Kevin and the excavator blocks the path with about a 5-foot ditch on one side of the drive and forest behind me. He gets out and says he's sorry and tells me I should stay. He'll make it up to me. Grandma comes out with the knife still in her hand, saying that it's Kevin's fault that I'm leaving. They bicker for a full 5 minutes until I yell that if they don't let me leave, I'm calling the police. All of a sudden they get super defensive, like I'm the one being unreasonable. So I turn off my engine and start to dial. Kevin gets back in his excavator and starts backing up. As soon as he's far enough, I can see an opening to drive across the grass. I turn my engine back on and rip out of the drive. I'm sure doing a number on the suspension of my little sedan. As soon as the property is out of sight, I go to call my friend Kayla. No service. I remembered back to earlier in the afternoon when I first got to the hostel. I was going to check my messages and saw the no service sign. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to call the police. I drove the 6 hours straight to Moncton, New Brunswick, and stayed with Kayla.
I was skateboarding home from my drummer's house after a long day of band practice around 4 p.m. We were drinking, smoking, and had some pills. Muscle relaxers to be exact. So it goes without saying that I was not sober. I was actually so under the influence that I couldn't even skate right. So I walked most of the way to my house. As I get to the corner of my street, this older man is walking towards me from the street that I have to walk down. At first, he didn't really alarm me. I didn't know if he lived around here or was looking for someone's house. I ignored him as I just wanted to be home already and sleep before my father got home. But right as I passed him, he asked me something in Spanish. That's when I noticed he was holding a box of candies. These candies were like the ones that children used to sell us for school. I smiled and told him, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." I began walking away and managed to take 2 steps before I heard him walk behind me. Now I was getting alarmed. I quickly turned and said, "Why are you following me?" He stood quiet and started speaking in Spanish again, but as he was, made hand movements of giving a blowjob. I'm not homophobic, but this was a grown man around his 30s doing this to a teenager. I began to yell at him that he better leave me alone or I'll beat the living crap out of him. I jumped back on my skateboard and skated as fast as I could home, locking every door in my house. I cried myself to sleep until my dad got home. This next one happened the next day, sadly. I was skating home again, and this time it was from a show my band had in the city's uptown. It was around 11, possibly midnight. I was a bit buzzed and high on weed, and I got off my board and began walking again. If I knew that would happen, I would have stopped skating. A black car pulled up into my street, and not even a minute after it did, a guy yelled at me. "Hey dude, you know where we can get some weed?" I didn't think about it and just said, "Nah man, it's late as hell." The guy replied, "Yeah, shit. I wanted to just kick it, smoke some weed and jerk off, you know?" Right when he said it, I was like, "Not again," in my head. I told him, "That's cool, I have to go." I started walking again and he followed behind me yelling, "Let's hang out at my pad. I can take you home later." At this point I'm like, forget this, I'm out. I jumped on my board and pretended to call my dad to open the door. Looking back, I should have really called him. My father wasn't the best, but he did protect my family. The guy raced down the street at full speed, seeing me on the phone. Now that I think about it, could it have been possible that the two guys were in cahoots? They had some plan to do something to me. It happened one day after another. So you never know. Or it could have been just pretty bad luck.
This story takes place in late 2012 and early 2013. I was 18, almost 19 at the time. I was living on campus at a small college in a mostly rural area in East Tennessee. I was in a very tight clique of girls. There were 5 of us, all 18 to 20. We were literally bound at the hip. Where you found one, you found the others. I have a pretty dominant personality, and I have 3 sisters that I am very protective of, so naturally I'm kind of motherly. With that being said, I was kind of the leader of our group when it came to doing things the right way or the safe way. We were all chatting it up one day when we found yet another thing we had in common: interest in the paranormal. We were a bunch of pretty bold women, and after a couple weeks of binging ghost hunting shows, we decided to Google haunted places near us. Only one of us had a car. I don't remember the make, but it was a small white 4-door, moderately reliable car. We all cram in there and head to this railroad. Some history on the location. It's more of a tunnel or an archway that has tracks that are still operating, running over it. Way back in the day, they would hang slaves or murderers from the top of it. The road, if you would even call it that, which runs under it, leads to a dead end. It's 3 a.m., the devil's hour. We finally make it to the place. It's December, so there's light snow on the ground, mostly just a soggy mess. The road has ruts about 12 inches deep everywhere, so we were already in panic mode, thinking we were going to be stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. The legend goes that you can park under the tunnel and roll down the windows, and you can hear people gasping for air. So we have our phones out ready to capture some EVPs like they do on the ghost shows. Naturally, my idiot self puts down my window first and starts asking dumb questions to the wind. It is also important to know that the dirt road had been flooded by a nearby creek, so we were parked in about 3 inches of fastly flowing water. Being the dramatic girls that we were, we swore we heard something, so we put the windows back up and played the recordings. A few things came close to sounding like words, but we knew it was just our minds playing tricks on us. I'm starting to lose interest in this idea, but the driver insisted that we get out. So here we are, 5 moderately attractive college girls, in the middle of nowhere, messing around at 3:40 in the morning. When we get out of the car, the splashes of our steps echoed against the stone tunnel. We couldn't see much, no streetlights, no nearby houses. Just our headlights shining into an empty field, and the red glow lighting up the narrow lump fest of a road behind us. The weaker link of our friends refused to get out, which turned out to be the right choice, while the wildest of our group decided she wanted to climb the steep hill to get on top of the tracks. 3 of us watch in horror as she tries to make it up the hill, when all of a sudden, the girl in the car screams so loud I could have thrown up from the fear. She says, "Someone is out here, in the field." We dash to the car and hop in, slamming the doors and locking them. We sit in silence, glaring at the field. I could literally feel her shaking, and I was in the passenger seat. But we saw nothing. Despite the running lights being on, the car itself was shut off, and had been the entire time, due to the legend saying you have to shut the engine off. I said, "We should just go," when all of a sudden, watery splashing stomps came from behind us, and they sounded like the person was at a full sprint. In a split second, the driver is cranking the engine, and we are all screaming, and I see a guy, white, late 40s, kind of scraggly, in the field about 50 feet in front of us. The girl in the back screamed, "That's him." The thing is, he couldn't have been the one running, because the only way to get to the field was through the tunnel we were parked in. Meanwhile, our car isn't starting. This allows me to realize that this guy staring at us blankly is only in weeds up to his waist, meaning he was down in those weeds the whole time. When she saw him, he must have just ducked down. Eventually the car starts, and the driver peels out in reverse, backing up into a wet, snowy bank, which makes our tires spin in place, also allowing our headlights to light up the hill that she was trying to climb earlier and the tracks above the tunnel. Sitting there right in the historical hanging spot, legs dangling over the tunnel, was a white guy, probably 25 to 30. He had one of those faces where you just knew that he was some crazy hillbilly. He was wearing a red baseball cap backwards, just swinging his feet. This made me realize that the running stomping sound was him getting a running start to dart up the hill to the tracks. Needless to say, we hauled it out of there, hitting the bumps so hard that I was coming off of my seat. We never stopped speeding until we got back to the campus, where we proceeded to stay up all night, wondering what we had just witnessed. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. Discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March of 2010, we were traveling to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on New Mexico 55. It's a remote 2-lane highway. We loved those types of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert you can see for miles, and there is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. We were on New Mexico 55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck ahead of us, going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about a half a mile away from him when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction that we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. 1, there was only one person in the truck. A middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off of us. And 2, he was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths, and then drop back a little, and then speed up again to us within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we were. Just 2 girls alone on the highway. We hadn't told anybody about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones, and neither one of us had signal. That's pretty typical for remote New Mexico, but very scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. But there was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slow. Maybe 20 miles an hour, if that. This pickup was old and beat up, whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55 mile per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was also talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all of this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed, and for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought that they had set up a trap in the road and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields because we were in an SUV, but this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what could happen if we went off of the road and got cornered, so we stayed on the highway. By now, the white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie, and he stayed right on our bumper, and the old beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The 3 of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was going to try to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles per hour and edging up to 90. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we would be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw that the plates read, U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountainair and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't exactly know what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There was something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police, and they said they would keep an eye on things. I still don't fully know what happened. Maybe we came into meth lab territory, but since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a back road country, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. But whatever is going on out there, it's not good.
I was only 9 when I realized we were in trouble. My mother, Stacy, had just gotten out of prison after serving 8 years for forgery. And naturally, I was very looking forward to manage to spend some quality time together. She had only been home for a week before she brought home Tony. Tony was a very eerie man that always stared at me and my little sister growing up. She barely knew, but I always knew. The years pushed forward, and I learnt more as a female. He would grope my arse and breasts. I'd push him away, and he rushed me into a couch or a wall. He would whisper in my ear, telling me that he has had his eyes on me since day one, and one day I'd legally be his. I pushed him again and slapped him. I told him, if you touch me or my sister, you will live in prison. And I was at aged 11. 4 years later and I'm 15. He's getting more touchy and vocal now. When I'm alone, he's around. When I'm relaxing, he's always lurking. I'm now growing irritated, with him trying to act like he's so innocent. He peeps around corners lurking. He was masturbating in the other room when I had friends over for sleepovers, and told me things like, I can't wait until you're 18, or walk in front of me so I can watch. He was a disgusting human being. That year's Christmas was one I'll never forget. We were sitting at the table and he's drinking heavily. I start a conversation with my mother about her new job. He interrupts and says that nobody cares about my mother's job and tells me to shut up. I look over at him and say, make me. He comes across the table after me, but he was too slow for me. I'd already cracked him over the head with a liquor bottle, and he fell with a gash on the back of his head. My mother had called the police, and it wasn't before long that I heard the sirens. That was the first time he had openly become physical. So one night, Tony is drinking, and he becomes a loose cannon when he drinks. But I am naturally a loose cannon, and he met his match that night. I hear him lurking through the halls in our 2-story newly modelled home. I get up, still dressed, and lurk as well. I get to the end of the hall, and someone snatches me from behind. It's Tony. He whispers, "Why have you been teasing me?" I smiled at him. "Oh, because I love taking your breath away." I quickly elbowed him and threw him down the stairs. There were about 30 stairs he went down, and he hit the bottom, slowly trying to get up the stairs. I flew down and lost it. He had it coming sooner or later. I started striking his face with force, using a small statue from the bottom of the stairs. He's 5'5", an average build, and he's grabbing my shirt, saying slurs like, "Bitch, you'll never get rid of me," and I'll find you." He flipped me over and started strangling me, but I managed to knee him in the testicles and he fell backwards. I attacked again and started punching, and my hands began to hurt from the impact, but I couldn't stop. I was enjoying it. At that moment, my mother grabbed me and the police pushed through. Apparently, my sister was in the kitchen getting something to drink when she heard Tony in the struggle. She'd seen us and then dashed upstairs to tell my mother. My sister told her everything because she was on Tony's radar too. Tony got taken into custody and we never heard from him again. We moved shortly after that and life moved on. I had a couple of kids with the love of my life and nothing else came of it. On my 21st birthday, I heard he'd gotten 5 years for molestation. I don't know the age of the girl, but I was glad he was doing time. All in all, with this experience, I'm not as friendly as I used to be, and I'm glad I never dealt with anything else like this. But all I know is that life is something that I take with a grain of salt now, and that revenge is sweet. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I would like to give a huge thank you to the amazing We Shouldn't Be Here for all his help with this video and narrations. Now, don't be fooled into thinking that this is over, because it's not by a long shot. Head on over to We Shouldn't Be Here's channel for another hour and a half of amazing stories. You'll be able to find the link in the description or on screen now. And why not show him some love whilst you're at it? He's incredibly talented, and I'm sure you'll really enjoy his works in the same way that I do. So what are you waiting for? I'll see you there.